In a quiet town surrounded by hills and rivers, there once lived a young woman named Amina. She was the daughter of a respected merchant, and her beauty and kindness were admired by all who knew her. Amina lived a comfortable, ordinary life, but there was one thing missing: true love. At least, until she met Ayan. Ayan was a poet, and his words were as beautiful as the sunsets that painted the city skies. He came from a poor family and struggled to make ends meet. Despite his humble origins, he had a charm and warmth that captivated Amina from the moment they first spoke. Their connection was instant, deep and undeniable, as if the universe had intended for their paths to cross. They talked for hours about everything. Amina visited the old library where Ayan had worked, and they exchanged books, poems, and dreams. He wrote her letters, each full of beautiful poems of love, and Amina wrote him her own story in response, a story of hopes and dreams yet to be realized. They helped each other feel alive in a world that often seemed to be moving too fast. As their love blossomed, so did the difficulties. Amina's wealthy, traditional family had other plans for her. They had already arranged her marriage to a wealthy admirer from a neighboring town. He was a man of status and influence, someone who could make the family name great. But Amina did not like him. She loved only Ayan. But she was bound by her family's expectations, and her obligations to them were a burden she could not escape. Ayan, too, felt burdened by his own reality. His family depended on his care, and he could not long endure the poet's life full of instability and poverty. He dreamed of a future with Amina, but he knew love alone wouldn't give them the life they wanted. He tried to work harder, to write for anyone who would listen, but the pressure grew with each passing day. One night, as the sun set, Ayan held Amina's hand and promised her that no matter what happened, their love would remain the same. "We may not have the life we dreamed of, but it will always be," he whispered, his voice a mixture of hope and sadness. Amina also believed in his love. She knew the world would try to tear them apart, but her heart refused to let go. But fate has a way of breaking hearts. The day of the wedding came, and Amina stood at the altar surrounded by her family and guests. Ayan stood outside, watching them from afar, his heart breaking with every second. He begged her to leave everything behind and run away with him, but she couldn't. Her family never forgave her, and she did not have the courage to break the ties that had bound her for so long. Though Ayan's heart was heavy, she left the city behind, vowing never to return. Amina's wedding was solemn, but her heart was empty as she took her vows. She thought of Ayan every moment, but the life she was forced to live took over, and the years passed in obligation and sorrow. A few years later, Amina became a mother. Her children were beautiful and her family was thriving. But the lack of love in her heart was clear. Every day she missed Ayan, his words, and his dreams. And in those quiet moments, when the house was quiet and her children were asleep, she would take out the letters he had written and read them over and over again, as if the ink could somehow bring him back to life. Time passed, and one day Amina heard rumors about a poet who had become famous in a faraway city. His words were considered legendary, and his name was whispered in all literary circles. She had been thinking about Ion. Could it be him? She wanted one last look at the man who had once stolen her heart and set off in search of him. She found him, but it was not the reunion she had hoped for. Ion was no longer the man she knew. He was old, tired, and a shadow of the dreamer he once was. The hope and love that once shone so brightly in his eyes was gone. He had achieved fame, but it came at a price. His poetry had brought him wealth, but it had also alienated him from the world he once knew. He never married, and he never found another love. His heart was torn apart by the decision they had had to make. When they met again, there were no words at first, only an overwhelming silence. Amina's heart ached as she looked at the man she had once loved so dearly. He was a stranger now, and yet she still saw in his eyes a faint glimmer of the love they had shared. "I should have come for you," Ion whispered in a voice of regret. "But I thought you'd be growing up and being happy without me." Amina shook her head, but tears welled up in her eyes. "I never got over it," she whispered. "I took you with me every day, even when I was forced to live without you." And so, under the same sky where their love had once blossomed, they stood as strangers, their hearts bound by the love they had lost. They talked for hours, but it was clear that their time together was over. The years, the decisions, the broken dreams, they had created a distance between them that could never be bridged. In the end, Amina returned to her family, her heart heavy with a love that would never exist. Ion began to write poetry. His words were colored by the sadness of a love that was gone. And so they went about their lives, chasing what they would never have, a love stolen from them by time and circumstance.